Senator Heller.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And it's my wish to follow up on some of your questions, Senator Warner's questions, and Senator Brown's questions as I use up my 5 minutes. But I want to thank everybody for being here. Thanks for taking time and spending time with us. It's very, very helpful. I'm bouncing back between a couple of committees here, and I know a couple of us here are doing the exact same thing. So I just want to make sure I ask the right committees the right questions. Having said that, and I think the theme here is that the number of financial institutions in this country has shrunk to its lowest level since the Great Depression. I know some of these statistics have already been discussed, but we once in this country had 18,000 banks, and today we have less than 7,000. In my home state of Nevada, there's about a dozen community banks left. That's less than half of what there were 5 years ago. The last bank closure occurred June of 2013. There are only 19 credit unions left in the state, serving nearly 340,000 members. 31% of Nevadans are unbanked or underbanked, which is the highest in the country. So I guess for the FDIC, is this a concern or a statistic?
It is a concern, and it's one of the reasons we conducted a study on consolidation in the banking industry to really look at what are the underlying reasons for consolidation and see what we could learn from that. What we saw over the period that you talked about with the decline of institutions from 18,000 down to less than 7,000 is that about 20% of the consolidation that occurred over that period was from failures that were really isolated into two significant crises primarily. And so to the extent that we can avoid financial crises in the future through strong supervision and good regulation, that will go a long way towards protecting institutions. The other 80% of consolidation we considered voluntary, and it was a mix of institutions that were merging with unrelated companies and institutions that were consolidating with related companies. The biggest single wave of that activity that really accounted for a substantial part of the voluntary consolidation occurred after the relaxations on interstate branching through Regal Neal and other state initiatives in the mid to late 90s. So that was the single biggest period. That can only happen once. So we don't expect to see large waves like that again. What's missing from the equation is de novos. We do expect that as the economy continues to improve, we'll see some de novo activity again. We're looking at it that way. The other point I might make...
I don't have a lot of time, so...
I'm sorry.
Sure. And I hate to cut you off, but I do have to get to my questions. This was brought up again. I want to follow up on the chairman's comments about this application process. I don't know if the Community Bank of Pennsylvania has been brought up in this hearing. It's the first new federally approved bank since 2010. I'm in the process of applying. The Pennsylvania Bank raised $17 million from investors, but had to spend nearly $1 million just in application fees. And they said, the attorney said that it was 8 to 16 inches of application pages in order to get it chartered. I guess the question is, quickly, if you have to spend $1 million to open up a bank in America today, how many more banks do you anticipate are going to pay that price?
We don't charge any application fees for applications for deposit insurance. There's no fee associated with that. Institutions do have startup costs as they go through.
But you understand what I'm saying. We're talking about the cost of putting together 16 inches of paperwork. Lawyers and accountants and everybody else that you have to put together costs them $1 million. Is this what we can expect in the future from the FDIC as costs? The question is are you going to open a bank today if you have those kind of costs?
That sounds like a large figure based on my experience.
Let me just go to Senator Warner's comments about costs and how they're not getting answers from small community banks in his state. I tell you, I'm getting answers from the small community banks. And Mr. Bland, I think you touched on it, and that is personnel costs. We have small banks in Nevada that are being audited by the feds. There are no exceptions, clean books, but then being required to hire another compliance officer. And they're saying, where are we going to come up with $120,000 to $150,000 to pay for another compliance officer, even though we have no exceptions? That's part of the problem of what's going on. So I want to ask, do I have a minute? Chairman, just on Agrippa, I just want to ask one quick question on Agrippa.
Go ahead.
Will you consider Dodd-Frank's regulations during the Agrippa process?
I'll take a stab.
Okay.
Given that, you know, the Agrippa process is looking at rules, established rules that are, you know, outdated, overly burdensome, and unnecessary. Most of the Dodd-Frank rules that the OCC has been responsible for haven't been implemented yet or have taken effect. And so it is not, we feel, appropriate to look at those rules at this time.
But isn't it true, though, we won't have another Agrippa study for another 10 years?
That is
And
true.
so if we don't include Dodd-Frank,
But I would say at the OCC, as part of our normal practice, we look at on an ongoing basis whether rules are appropriate in terms of still relevant, and we will make changes if they need to without waiting for the next Agrippa process.
okay, to all of you, thank you very much for being here. Mr. Chairman, thank you.